And now, Representative Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you so much. Aloha. That's what I call Iowa nice. It's so good to be here with all of you. Thank you very much, the Des Moines Register, for hosting this and giving us the opportunity to be able to give a little bit of background about who I am and why I'm running for president. I'm really grateful throughout this whole campaign to have the opportunity to come to places like Iowa, to go to communities across the country, and just be reminded in every stop that we have about how great our country is. Why? Because I know who makes our country great. It is we, the people. And to see the diversity, to see the heart, to see the care that we as Americans have for each other is what gives me hope for our future. Because right now we are facing incredibly challenging times. We are facing great divisiveness. And unfortunately, we face self-serving politicians and people in positions of power who are seeking to tear us apart and to divide us for their own selfish gain, whether it be for political gain or profits or clicks online or media ratings or whatever it is. They're putting their own selfish interest ahead of the interest of the people, separating us, dividing us, driving wedges between us based on the color of our skin, where we come from, how we worship, or if we worship, or who we love, all of these different things that make up the diverse fabric that is the United States of America. And this is so heartbreaking. This is so heartbreaking because we love our country. I love our country. I love our people. It's why after the terrorist attack on 9/11, I enlisted in the Army National Guard. I still serve as a soldier today, now for over 16 years. Thank you for your service. It's why I deployed twice to the Middle East. I volunteered to deploy with my unit. And if we could just for a moment here now, ask all of our veterans who are here and those with military families, if you could raise your hand or stand and just let us thank you for your service. Thank you. Thank you for your sacrifice. All of you. And I had the privilege of serving with people from all across this country. Thank you.
Nope.
Check. 1, 2.
Hello?
That's better. Can you guys hear me in the back? I serve with people from all across this country, from the day I showed up at basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, through my training at Fort Sam Houston in Texas, and Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, and all the different places where we had an opportunity to go. People who I served with during those 2 deployments downrange, and the amazing thing that I felt was that those who I stood in that formation with, those who I served with, we all wore the same uniform, serving the same flag, focused on that mission that we have of serving our country, of keeping the American people safe. That there was no difference in that focus. That even though we came Democrats, Republicans, independents, conservatives, liberals, black, white, brown, different religions, we represented the diversity of this country, but we stood as one unit, with one voice, with one focus on putting service above self and putting country before self. This speaks to who we are as Americans. This speaks to what unites us as a country, and I think it's especially important for us to remember that now. As those who are in power seek to tear us apart for their own selfish gain, it is only when we, the people, stand up around this unifying principle of freedom, of justice, of opportunity, remembering those freedoms and inalienable rights that are enshrined in our Constitution for every single one of us. Those rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When we come together around these unifying principles with love for our country and love for each other, there is no obstacle we cannot overcome. And it is only when we do that that we can begin to solve the great challenges of our day. And there are many. But we are starting on that common foundation, coming together, overcoming those partisan differences, those ideological differences, and having conversations with each other based on respect, understanding that when we care for each other, we'll find that we have far more in common than maybe we realized before. When we come together, we realize that we are equally concerned about our loved ones falling sick and not being able to get the health care that they need because they can't afford it. When we come together, we'll realize that, hey, we all are concerned about having clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. When we come together, we realize that we are concerned about making sure our kids are not afraid for their life when they go to school. When we come together, we realize we want to make sure that we have bridges that serve us, that our infrastructure doesn't threaten us or our families or our well-being as farmers. When we come together, we can recognize how much we have in common. We have different ideas on how to solve these challenges. That's not a bad thing. When we come together united in that mission focus of service and care for each other, then we bring about that change. We bring about the big kind of change we need to see. Because really what's at stake here, for me as a Democrat, offering to serve you as your president, commander-in-chief, is yes, defeating Donald Trump in 2020, but it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that because folks in this country were struggling and suffering before November of 2016, and we've got to recognize that in order to solve the deep problems that we face, in order to bring about the systemic problems that we face. And if we don't recognize those problems, we'll never be able to solve them. And really, as we look down each of the issues that concern us in our everyday lives, we come down to a couple of common threads. Do you feel that our country is fulfilling the vision our founders had for us, that we really have a government of, by, and for the people? We don't. Instead, what we have is a government of, by, and for the rich and powerful, of, by, and for the very few who can buy influence over politicians who are for sale, a government of, by, and for special interests and corporations who are just looking out for their bottom line and how they can make more profits without thinking about the consequence that it has on our everyday lives. So when we're talking about the deep-seated change we need to bring about, this is what we're talking about. And the only way this change happens is when we, the people, rise up and demand it. Demand that we have leaders who are truly of, by, and for the people. To take away the big influence that money has in our politics. To stop the revolving door that we see with elected leaders who serve one day and then go and get hired and get paid lots of money the next day to work as a lobbyist. There are very clear reforms that we need to make in Washington to overturn Citizens United, to get rid of dark money in politics, to make it so that politicians are not influenced by the PAC contributions they get from lobbyists, to make it so that members of Congress are not allowed to become lobbyists after they leave office. We have so much power as people. We've got to remember that. We are the ones who hire and fire the people who are elected to serve us, not the special interests, not the big corporations. They are hired to serve the people. So we've got to exercise our voices to make sure that is actually happening. And that's how, when we do that, we can begin to bring about the kind of big change that we need to see. So I'm really proud of our campaign. We have a completely people-powered campaign with volunteers and folks who are giving $1, $5, $10, whatever they can, to make sure that we're able to get our message out there, taking no contributions from PACs, no contributions from lobbyists, making sure that the voices of the people are at the forefront of everything that we do. Now, there's a lot of work that we have ahead of us, and we talked about a couple of them. The thing that I hear most from people is about healthcare, about how most families in this country are one healthcare emergency away from total bankruptcy and disaster. How is it possible that in this country that we spend far more as a country on healthcare, yet we have far worse outcomes? It's unacceptable. This is why I support passing Medicare for All legislation that will make sure that every single American is able to get the care that we need in this country. Private insurance, if you want to choose that route and go for a private option, that's up to you. But we've got to make sure that no one is turned away when they are sick and in need of care. This is something that's impacting all Americans. Another thing impacting all Americans is the problems posed to us by climate change. Now, sometimes when you get into these conversations in Washington, they get very political and partisan when you talk about climate change because it's become this buzzword. It's this hot topic word where you're either on one side or the other. But when you just stop for a moment and talk as people, not as partisans, but as people, then we find that we all need clean water to survive. Water is life. None of us can survive without it. We need to know that our kids and our families and their homes and communities are going to have clean air to breathe. That we want to make sure that we have a safe planet. We want to protect the homes, the land that we love, the land that we farm. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about addressing climate change, moving away from fossil fuels, investing in clean, renewable energy that is better for us, better for the planet, and better for our pocketbooks. On all fronts, we're talking about things that are important to all of us as people. So we talk about criminal justice reform. This is an area where we have bipartisan support, where people across this country are seeing their lives damaged, families being torn apart by this broken justice system, by a failed war on drugs, where people are still being thrown in prison for basic marijuana violations. This is why in Congress, I've introduced the only bipartisan bill in Congress that would finally end the federal marijuana prohibition. To begin that process, these are things that are important to all of us. We look at the opioid crisis and the epidemic and the toll that it's taking on families across the country. See how big pharma is responsible for proliferating these highly addictive drugs, cheating and lying to people about how addictive they are, where folks go to the doctor and they get a bunch of these drugs and they aren't told about the risks and the dangers that go with them. And we end up with devastation, people losing their lives, families being torn apart, people seeing their lives and their careers completely devastated, and then seeing those people who are victims of this crisis being treated as criminals. This is wrong. This is a symptom of what happens when we have a government for the few and the rich and powerful rather than a government for the people. This is why we need to invest in treatment, to make sure that we are providing those opportunities to build that path forward towards recovery and do all we can to hold Big Pharma accountable for all the damage they have done. There are so many issues that we need to address. Criminal justice reform, bringing about comprehensive immigration reform. This is something we are seeing that's happening at the border, but it's something that's affecting communities across our country. I've spoken with a lot of folks here today who are concerned about our broken legal immigration system. Why is it that Congress has done nothing? Because of hyper-partisanship. People who are more interested in the political win rather than actually solving the problem. Imagine how much we could do. Imagine how much we could do if leaders in Washington took off their political hats and just said, hey, let's sit around the table and work it out. Just like we do in our everyday lives, right? At work, at school, in our own families, you gotta work it out. There is so much potential and opportunity for us to make sure that every time there's an election, you don't see the same old tired conversations happening, that we can actually begin to solve these problems. Now, there's an issue that is central to all of these that I want to bring up, and I think many of you will recognize how important it is, and that is the cost of war. The cost of war is something that we as veterans, we as service members, we as those who have loved ones who served or are serving in the military understand the high human cost of war. During my first deployment to Iraq in 2005, I served in a field medical unit. And our camp was about 40 miles north of Baghdad, and every single day I saw that heart-wrenching high human cost of war. Brothers and sisters in my unit, brothers and sisters in uniform who paid the ultimate price, who never made that trip home. Others who did, but with many coming home with both visible and invisible wounds. The terrible high cost of war. Then you also see the reality that even if you've never served in uniform, every single one of us as Americans has paid the price for war. You might not realize it, but the reality is every time politicians tell you, sorry, there's just not enough money to make sure the levees in your communities work to prevent flooding. There's just not enough money to build up our infrastructure, not enough money to make sure the water is clean, not enough money to make sure our teachers are paid what they deserve and our kids are getting a great education. Every time they tell you, sorry, there's just not enough money, the reality is these same politicians are signing off on and approving spending trillions of our taxpayer dollars on paying for these wasteful, counterproductive wars that make our country less safe. We've seen these wars in Iraq and Libya and Syria, how they have strengthened terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, how they have taken such a toll on our service members and military families, how they've taken a toll in devastating the lives of the people in the countries where we wage these wars, and how they have sucked the precious resources out of our schools, out of our communities, out of our healthcare system that we so desperately need. This is why it's important to recognize you cannot separate foreign policy from domestic policy. It's not just one little issue that sits on the side as we talk about all the other challenges that we face. This is why, as your president, as your commander-in-chief, I'm committed to ending these wasteful wars. Working to end this new Cold War we are in with ever-escalating tensions between the United States and other nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, escalated by things like what President Trump did just recently in tearing up this historic INF treaty that was negotiated between Reagan and Gorbachev 30 years ago. A historic treaty that made our country and our people more safe, that made the world more safe. Instead of working to improve it, exercising diplomacy and negotiations, he tore it up, walked away, and now is sparking off a nuclear arms race that will make our world less safe, that pushes us closer to the brink of nuclear catastrophe and total annihilation. Oh, by the way, and also spending more of our taxpayer dollars to build those weapons. This is what we're talking about. This is what is at stake. And this is why there is such a sense of urgency, why we cannot afford to wait to bring about this sea change in our leadership and our foreign policy so that we can focus our limited resources directly in serving the people. This is why I'm so committed to push forward in this campaign, bringing the experience that I have, yes, as a soldier, but the experience that I have as a member of Congress, serving almost 7 years, focused on national security, serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, recognizing that this issue is central to our ability to be able to address all of the other challenges that we face. Now, the obstacles are great. We're not naive to the power of big money, the power of the establishment, but we've got to remember that there is no force more powerful than we, the people, rise up, united in this love we have for our country and for each other and for our future, transcending all of the things that are used to divide us, staying focused on our mission of service, serving each other, taking care of each other, and serving the best interest of our country. That's why I'm running for president. That's why I'm here asking for your support. If you'd like more information, please visit tulsi2020.com. And I look forward to coming back here to Iowa a whole lot more and seeing you again. Enjoy the rest of your day here. It's great to see you all. Aloha, another big one. Thank you so much. Have a great day. think we're out of time, sir. I'm sorry, I'll be around. This is your friend. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Aloha, everybody.
See you tomorrow. Can I have your attention on the ground? Can I have your attention, please? Mark, Nash. Please be acting and Nash. All of your moves.
Yeah, we're gonna go to the Grand Industries building.
I apologize. I may have blocked you, Kevin.
No. You.
This gentleman's gonna be quite
Great job, Tulsi.
Thank you.
Possibly sign baseball for me, please. Thank you. Thank you. Save your voice.
Do you play baseball?
I don't. Save your voice.
She serves, so you're very athletic.
Save your voice. Pace yourself. Yeah. You're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you very much.
All the way out from the
Yeah?
here.
Nice to see you.
My seat was wonderful.
Thank you.
And you were fabulous.
Thank you. Hi, thank you. Excuse me. All right.
Got to jump in here really quick. Congresswoman Gabbard.
Just gonna go right there into the corner.
You go in
and
there too.
Our register reporter this way.
Hello, everybody.
Congressman Gabbard, do you believe a veteran should be commander-in-chief, or what specifically about Kamala Harris as a veteran that you feel is going after position?
Well, as a soldier, I believe it's very important that we have a president who is qualified to serve as responsibility that the president has. Serving in uniform is not a prerequisite to serve as president, but having a deep understanding of national security, of our foreign policy, and of the consequences of the decisions that a president has to make is essential, I believe, for someone to serve in that role. And I speak from a place of personal concern because I, like so many others in this country, have dealt with the consequences of a president who lacks that experience and qualification, falling under the influence of the foreign policy establishment and the military-industrial complex, leading us into a war in Iraq, for example, that was waged under false pretenses and that was counter to the interests of our country and our people. We cannot afford to allow this to continue.
But what specifically about Kamala Harris?
First three questions.
Oh, sorry.
What specifically about Kamala Harris do you want to address?
Again, I think, I don't know, there was the interview that came up and they were asking me questions about her, and specifically she lacks that national security background and that experience that I believe is essential for someone to serve in that role and fulfill that responsibility both to our service members, our veterans, and to our country as Commander-in-Chief.
So you talked a bit about the TPP policy.
Yes.
How do you believe that impacts Iowans, or should it be a bigger focus on the campaign stage in debates?
I think TPP is part of the broader conversation about trade that has a huge impact on Iowans and people across the country, because we've seen how these trade deals of the past have been negotiated with these large multinational corporations having seats around the table, but the voices of real people and farmers and manufacturers and small business owners really aren't represented and aren't heard. That's why we see how these trade deals are very often disproportionately benefiting the multinational corporations. We'll make a lot of money from them without focus on the impact of jobs right here at home, of job creators, of small business owners and manufacturers and farmers. This has been the problem we've seen with a lot of trade agreements in the past, and this is what needs to be corrected going forward. We've got to be a part of the global community. Trade is important. It's got to be fair trade and trade deals that truly represent serving the interests of our people and protecting our environment.
Congresswoman,
Congresswoman, if I may ask.
Biden said that poor kids were just as
as bright as white kids. Is that racist?
I didn't hear what he said.
He said that poor kids were just as bright as white kids, and is that
what he
comment
meant to
racist?
say, or
It
did?
was a longer statement than that.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to comment on something that I didn't hear of, so I'm gonna let that go.
Congresswoman, if I may,
Break into the top tier. They have 3 tickets out of Iowa. How do you break just this question?
This is early on. We're seeing a lot of things changing constantly in this race, and so what I'm really focused on is doing what we're doing out here today, really getting down into communities here in Iowa, New Hampshire, and other parts of the country, and engaging directly with voters. To me, there's no better way to be able to connect, to hear about their concerns, and to be able to make my case as I offer to serve them as president.
You're talking a lot about your military record. Is that what do you offer that you think is extra special for you that you have?
It's the unique experience that I have. Yes, it's the personal experience as a soldier, having deployed twice in the Middle East and understanding deeply what the cost and consequences are of the decisions that a commander-in-chief will make, but it's the almost 7 years of national security experience that I have in Congress, foreign affairs, armed services, homeland securities committees, meeting with leaders of other countries, meeting to address the challenges of our day that give me the background, the experience, and the conviction to be able to walk in understanding that our job, my job as president, would be to serve the interests of the people and our country, and to have the foresight and good judgment to make decisions that will best serve our interests and not continue to waste more and more of our taxpayer dollars and more American lives.
Congresswoman, if I may ask, do you think President Trump will follow through with bipartisan gun background checks legislation?
I sure hope so, for the country's sake. You know, we in the House of Representatives passed sensible gun safety legislation a couple of months ago, and it's just been sitting in the Senate waiting for a vote. So far, Senator McConnell has refused to allow these bills to come to the floor for a vote, bills that had bipartisan support in the House of Representatives. So if Trump is saying he's going to get Mitch McConnell to bring those bills to the floor for a vote and pass, then he should do so for the sake of the American people.
Congresswoman, if I just may follow up with one other question regarding white supremacy. Some presidential candidates have gone as far as to call Donald Trump a white supremacist. Would you go that far as to calling him that?
What's more important for us, for all of us, to be concerned about is what Donald Trump is doing. He's fomenting racism and divisiveness and bigotry in this country for his own political gain, with very dangerous consequences. I think that's something that we as Americans, this is something that goes beyond partisanship. It's something that we need to come together and stand together on and say we won't stand for this because it's not who we are. It's not who we are. We will stand up for one another regardless of a race or religion or orientation or ethnicity or anything else, because we represent the strength of our country. We are strongest when we stand united, and whether we are the target of that attack or not, we must stand together.
Will the Democrats be willing to let go of the Mueller report?
Let go of the Mueller report?
Because, I mean, you guys have been going at it for 3 years, and there's nothing there. It's just taxpayer dollars. Was that a possibility?
Well, Congress is continuing to exercise its oversight responsibility. What I think Congress also needs to be able to do is actually focus on passing legislation that meets a lot. That meets a lot of the challenges that I was talking about here today. Because as I travel to different communities across the country, that's what people are most concerned about. You know, very few people are asking about what happens with the Mueller report. Most people are asking about what happens with our health care. What happens when my child gets sick.
So you guys are saying
I'm going to take somebody else.
Congresswoman, will you commit to supporting the eventual nominee, and will you rule out a third-party run?
Yes, I will support the eventual nominee. I'm working hard to make sure that's me. And if I am not the nominee, I will not run as a third-party candidate.
You wanted to talk a lot about mass incarceration.
Forces, you know how important intelligence is.
Yes.
How do you feel about two of the top leaders in the intelligence community leaving their posts? What does that mean?
I think anytime you have a lot of upheaval, it can cause some instability and uncertainty. I'm not familiar with why they're leaving or what's going on, but I know there's a lot of folks who are working to continue to do their jobs every day to serve our country.
To address mass incarceration in the country, you and Kamala Harris showed you had much different approaches. Speak a little bit to your difference of approach than the other candidates, and would you commit to ending the filibuster to pass meaningful efforts to end mass incarceration in the country?
Well, I think we've seen already what's possible, especially right now where you've got Democrats and Republicans, progressives and conservatives coming around to fix our broken criminal justice system. I don't think we've got to wait around for anything to continue down that path. We've already passed significant prison reform through the First Step Act. We've got to follow that up with more of the necessary reforms, once again, that have both Democrat and Republican support. Things like sentencing reform, things like ending the cash bail system. And I'm continuing to push hard to end the federal marijuana prohibition. There's a lot more that we need to do, and I think this is one of the areas where we've got more potential to get something done more quickly, probably, than many other issues.
The filibuster, would you end it to?
That's what I'm saying. That's a different issue. What I'm saying is we've already started. We need to continue. We can do it now.
2 more questions.
How are you going to continue?
I'm going to let somebody else ask a question.
Congresswoman,
yes.
Do you consider yourself an anti-imperialist?
I consider myself a pro-American. Everything that I'm saying, everything that I'm doing comes from a place of love for our country and love for our people, and recognizing how important it is that we have unifying leadership in this country to bring people together so that we can bring about the kinds of changes we need to see. And as far as our foreign policy goes, to end our wasteful, failed policies of regime change so that we can focus on serving the interests of the American people, using the limited resources we have to do so.
A lot of Iowans said that they were kind of worried about this left-leaning turn within the party, saying that they would vote for Trump just because of the new policies that we've seen in Congress. Specifically, they've been citing these 4 congresswomen known as the Squad. What do you say to that? Do you think it's a smart strategy for for Democrats to kind of embrace these, will it energize Democrats, or could it really scare off more than half the country?
I think there's too much conversation focused on one side versus the other side, where you're talking about Democrats versus Republicans, left versus right, or some of the differences even within the Democratic Party that we're seeing. Instead, let's just focus on the problem and how we find a solution, because it is this divisiveness and the labels that people seem really obsessed with that are getting in the way of just people coming together as people and saying, let's solve problems. And you might have a different idea on how to solve them than I would, but let's begin that conversation, because we find that when we actually do that, then things get done, rather than sitting here and fighting and squabbling about other things.
Do you think Trump's attacks are working, though?
Which attacks are you
By attacking those congresswomen and kind of...
I try not to pay too much attention to Trump. Once again, I'm really focused on how we can best connect with, hear the needs of the American people, make it so Washington is not such a disconnected bubble that it is, where they're out of touch with the reality that folks are dealing with in their everyday lives, and see how we can come together across the country, across party lines, across all of these divides to serve them.
Thank you guys, everyone.
Thank you. Good to see you. Aloha, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to do a talking head bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we can go someplace.
Yeah, let's get out.
We walk and talk? Yeah, we should walk and talk.
I saw that you're still not on the bill.
Why? We're still in a request.
Okay. I've been in touch with Elijah Cummings' office, so I just wanted to check and make sure you're still going to get it.
Yeah. No, I talked to their staff about getting my name added to the bill. They're the only ones who can do it. So.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks for staying on it.
Let's keep it going.
Appreciate
We got to walk and talk.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to take a quick picture here.
Walk and talk.
Thank you so much.
How are you guys doing?
Good. I'm originally from Iowa, so...
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Good seeing you.
Would you take money from the military-industrial
Sorry,
complex
guys.
and invest it more in global health? We get it at it's my generation, but right now we're not showing the political will.
Congresswoman Gabbard, I know we talked to you
earlier. Would you increase funding for global AIDS programs if you become president?
This is one of the many things that we need to focus on and take our money away from the wrong-headed foreign policy decisions that we have now, and instead focus on how we can best serve our people and how we can best be a force for good in the world.
So you would agree to increasing funding for global AIDS?
I think this is, yes, it's one of the many things that we need to invest more in.
Great, thank you so much.
Congressman Gabbard, we talked to you earlier today about supporting
Sorry,
DC
I want to say hi to a few more people here. How are you?
Totally fine.
He's trying to have
We talked to you earlier about supporting
Yeah.
DC statehood. Now that you have a little bit more information,
I actually haven't had a chance to look at more information.
the
since
one
we talked
pager that we
earlier
gave you
today.
earlier?
I haven't had a chance
You haven't
to
had
look
a
at
chance?
it yet.
We would
Sorry,
really
it's
like
been
for you to do
nonstop.
that because, 700,000 Americans do not get to actively partake in their democracy. And it seems that the seat of power doesn't care what happens in the actual city. And we would really want you to think about that, especially if you become president of the United States.
Absolutely.
And supporting 51 votes in the Senate.
And there are already 12 candidates who support
And
as
a majority
well.
of candidates who also supported as well.
Congresswoman, we're going this way.
Thank you so
Congresswoman, I have a
much.
question. I have a question, Congresswoman. You support reparations. Can I have my money now?
Very much.
The reparations conversation. You support reparations, correct?
I support H.R. 40.
You support
the
H.R. 40, which is
legislation that
reparations.
Jackson Lee has introduced.
Okay. Now, those are cash payments,
That
correct?
would form a commission. Have you read the bill?
I have.
Okay.
Now, it would form a commission. Now, the question that I have, and I asked this with Marianne Williamson before.
It's an
the
important
problem,
conversation.
It is an important conversation. The problem that I have as a black American who actually doesn't support reparations, I'm afraid that the people who are race hustling for black votes in the past are going to get that money, and it's not going to get into the hands of the people. So what would you say to that?
And I think this is a conversation we need to have as a country about how we can best move forward as a country given the great atrocities that occurred in the past.
And
Hey
as a
guys,
black
how are
voter,
you?
what would you say to people who say that Democrats only come to black voters with handouts every 4 to 8 years? And there are some black people that are actually doing well under this economy. What would you say to them?
I think we've got to look at the problems and the challenges that people are facing. All of us.
Okay.
How are you? She's old enough to vote. Thank you so much. Yeah. We're from Minnesota.
I'm so glad to see you here today.
Can somebody get mine in there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
In New York.
You got it, AJ?
Thank you. We heard your speech. We loved it.
Guys,
Thank
I
you so
apologize.
much. Thank
One,
you, Otto.
right up here. 1, 2, 3. All right, awesome.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of your day here.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for coming
you.
out. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Aloha. Nice to meet
Aloha.
you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. Aloha.
Tulsi, you're headed to the one place where you can actually eat something, the veggie.
Oh, good.
Heads up, heads
Other people seem to be really worried that I'm not going to find anything to eat
That
here
was
today.
like such a huge storyline. I was like, what is she gonna eat?
It looks like there's a lot of deep fried
Everything.
everything.
Deep fried everything. There's an avocado fry that's really good.
Oh, nice. That's more my.
And over there is the pineapple whip.
Nice. Sounds like you've already spocked it all out. That's awesome.
We can. Right over there.
Word on the censorship of Big Tech.
Right in here.
Yeah.
Voice has been
Tell me if it's a yes.
I have.
How do we combat
I'm
that?
suing Google, not because of what they did to my campaign, but for the American people who I think are under threat from the power that big tech has and the influence they have.
Is it
over
too
us
much?
and absolutely.
Manipulating the election results, potentially. They're
You want to get in line.
Okay, we're going to get mine.
They're manipulating the election results on algorithms.
What do you want to do, guys?
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Play rock, paper, scissors?
Yes.
Okay. Wait.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. I beat you to
Stand
it.
in line right here.
1, 2, 3. I got you. That's a good sign for the country.
Means you'll win, right?
There you go. There you go. Thank you, guys. I like your shirt, man. It's vintage. Thank you. Thank you. Impact accomplished. I just don't want to push people like out of the way. Are you guys standing in line? Yeah.
Do you mind if I get a picture with you? I'm a government teacher. You signed my sign, so I'll put that in my classroom. Thank you for your service, both in the military and government. I love it.
So much.
I love
Good.
it. I'm getting them convinced to pay attention. Is this the line?
Yeah, we're going right here. Okay. Guys, if press could go over there so we can get out of the sidewalk, that'd be awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw you guys
Loved your
sitting out
speech.
there.
Thank you.
And my grandfather had Alzheimer's. And I just appreciate you bringing voice to so many people who are still struggling.
We appreciate that. My Korean war vet father passed away.
Yeah.
So I thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know where
Good picture?
Yes.
To get one?
Back here, of course.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
PDJ back there.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work. You have all of our support. Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you.
From Hawaii. Awesome. Just part. We're from Maui.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Good to see you out here. We're going to do a quick photo right here. Yes, of course.
Thank you very much, the three of you. That's my job. You're wrong. Awesome. Thank you very much. Yes.
Appreciate it.
Mine
is right here.
I just want to make sure. Okay, cool. So this is your spot in line.
Cool. How are you doing, Tulsi? Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right.
Good to see you.
The Democrats will try to want to make sure you get to the lady before you.
Oh yeah, of course.
Tell them you crack you guys down.
I'd like to. We need to go, right?
Hang around.
Hi. Hi. Sorry, we're disrupting your.
Oh, that's
your
okay.
What are we ordering?
What did we get? I don't even know.
Oh
The
my
whole
God, there's
tray.
we got peanut butter and jelly.
All right, we are good to go. And take a look.
It sounds kind of avocado sounds good.
Or the veggie combo. Thank you, ketchup and mustard. Right. Or the veggie combo.
Tulsi, will you take a public stand for no first strike?
Yes. I'm
Thank
a
you.
co-sponsor of legislation already to make sure that we have no first use.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you guys? I'm Tulsi Gabbard.
Hi,
Nice to meet you.
Sorry to disrupt you on the debate.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What can we get for you?
What are we getting? I think we're getting avocado slices.
Avocado slices.
Anything else?
You want the veggie combo or the corn dog?
We'll go with we'll get the veggie corn dog.
Veggie corn dog?
Yes.
Okay, that'll be $12.
How many?
Tulsi, are you pescatarian?
That's all I got, thanks.
Okay, great, because I have two.
People were really, I'm vegan, and people were worried I wasn't going to find anything to eat over here. So thanks for delivering.
Thank you. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you very
Ketchup and
much.
mustard are on our right.
All right.
Have a
Appreciate
good
it.
day.
Take care.
Good luck.
I don't know how you want to eat it, or?
Finger food. Where are we going? We got to go to the Democratic
table. So that's that way.
Yeah, follow me, guys.
All right. Give us a pass, please. Give us a pass. Veggie combo and a veggie corn dog. She's vegan.
I'm actually vegan, but a lot of people in Hawaii would.
Can I get a selfie for my
would relate to that.
Thank you. Oh, you're in the shadow. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Mushrooms,
Appreciate onion rings.
Congressman, you have it's an honor to meet you.
Make a photo.
Architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth, and they are petitioning Congress to pass it's called Bobby McIlvain World Trade Center Investigation Act.
Okay.
And here I got the information here
Great.
about this here.
Is that? Can I take that with me?
I want you to have this.
Okay, great.
That's my name there. And please review it, or have somebody review it.
Thank you.
Okay,
nice
thank you.
to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Iowa. Can I have a
Hi.
picture?
Can I get a picture with you?
Yes, you can.
All right, she can take it.
Yes, you can.
You want from me
I kept saying I'm Iowa. I'm not the press. 1, 2, 3. You're more. Thank you.
Can we get one more song
for
for someone?
Me too.
Fabulous.
Me too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm jumping right in
How
here.
are you?
I'm
Yeah, good
fine.
idea.
Ready? 1, 2,
Awesome.
Thank you for your
Thank
service.
you.
God
What's
bless
your
you.
name?
My name's Scarlett.
Scarlett. Beautiful name. Can I take a picture with you? All right.
1, 2, and... Got that in there too.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Thank
Keep
you.
it going
very
through
much.
this way.
Take care.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Can we get a picture?
Yeah.
Representative Tulsi Gabbard at the Iowa State Fair, one of 5 Democrats attending the political soapbox, a chance to speak to fairgoers, and we're going to continue to watch that and remind you that our coverage will continue tonight from Clear Lake, Iowa. We'll be live beginning at 7 o'clock Eastern Time with